So, I will be discussing intergroup relations and interventions, including large group interventions. So, what is an intergroup relations interventions? Intergroup relation interventions. Intergroup team building intervention intends to increase communications and interactions between work-related groups to reduce the amount of dysfunctional competition. Intergroup intervention also are integrated into organizational development programs to facilitate cooperation and efficiency between different groups within an organization. Intergroup relation intervention also replace a parochial independent point of view with an awareness of the necessity for interdependence of action calling on the best efforts of both the groups. Intergroup interventions are integrated into organizational development programs to facilitate cooperation and efficiency between different groups within an organization. So now let us proceed to rotating membership. Rotating membership, such as interventions, are used by organizational development change agents to minimize the negative effects for intergroup rivalry that result from employee allegiance to the group of divisions. The intervention, the, in, the intervention basically intends temporarily putting group members into the rival groups. As more people interact in the different groups, greater understanding results. Organizational development joint activity interventions serve the same basic function as the rotating membership approach, but it involves getting members of different groups to work together toward a common goal. Similarly, common enemy interventions achieve the same results by finding an adversary common to two or more groups and then getting members of the groups to work together to overcome the threat. Example of common enemies includes competitors, government regulation, and economic condition. So now let us proceed to characteristic of an intergroup conflict. Intergroup conflicts are characterized by perception of others as the enemy, stereotyping, constipated, distorted, and inaccurate communication, and stoppage of feedback and data input. Each group begins to praise itself and its products more positively and believes that it can do no wrong and the other can do no right. There might even be acts of sabotage against the other group, using the idea of common enemy outside the group that both groups dislike to bring them closer, increasing interaction and communication under favorable conditions and finding a super coordinate goals that both groups desire. Rotating members of the group, training, etc. are helpful strategies that have been used to deal with intergroup conflict. So what are the reasons why this intergroup conflict happens? So there are a lot of reasons why does intergroup conflict happens. One of the most prominent reasons for intergroup conflict is simply the nature of the group. Other reasons may be work interdependence, goal variances, differences in perceptions, and the increased demand for specialists. Also, individual members of a group often play a role in the initiation of group conflict. Any given group embodies various qualities, values, or unique traits that are created, followed, and even defended. These clans can then distinguish, as form them. Members members who violate important aspects of the group, and especially outsiders who offend these ideals in some way, normally receive some type of corrective or defensive response. Relationships between groups often reflect the opinions they hold of each other's characteristic. When groups share some interests and their directions seems parallel, Each group may view the other positively. However, if the activities and goals of groups differ, they may view each other in a negative manner. However, when trying to prevent or correct intergroup conflict, it is important to consider the history of relations between the groups in conflict. History will repeat itself is list to in is list is left to its own advice. Limited resources or reward structures can foster intergroup conflict by making the differences in group goals more apparent, differences in perceptions among groups regarding time and status. When coupled with different group goals, it can also create a conflict. Reorganizing of the workplace and integration of services and facilities can be stressful to some and create negative conflict. Some individuals within the group have inherent traits or social histories that pack intergroup conflict. But problems within intergroup relations are not usually caused by deviant behavior or a few individuals. So what are the consequences of intergroup conflict? Intergroup conflict causes changes to occur, both within the groups in conflict and between them. Within the groups, members will usually overlook individual differences in an effort to unite against the other side. And with this concerted effort to focus is on the task, the group can become more efficient and effective at what they do, and members can become more loyal, closely following group norms. Problems can occur. However, when the group loses focus on the organization's goals and becomes closed off from other groups, haftiness and isolation quickly lead to decrease in communication. Communication is the key between groups in reciprocal interdependence, and these have the highest negative consequences for effective lack of effective communication. Miscommunication can be the death knell of an organization. Miscommunication can be the death knell of an organization. So how do we solve this crisis? How do we solve this intergroup conflict, and how can we prevent this kind of. So there are numerous choices available to circumvent conflict, to keep it from becoming damaging, and to resolve conflict that is more serious. This includes simple avoidance where possible, problem solving, changing certain variable in the workplace, and in-house alternative dispute resolution or ADR programs. Any resolution method should depend on why does the conflict occurred, the seriousness of the conflict, and the type. A face-to-face meeting, as in as in problem solving, can be very effective in conflicts of misunderstanding or language barriers. The groups can discuss issues and relevant information with or without a facilitator to reach a resolution. Where groups have differing goals, it may be prudent to establish some type of goal that can only be reached when the conflicting groups work together. As a superordinate goal not only helps alleviate conflict, it also focuses on performance, which is what the organization needs to survive. A downside to this position is the identification of a common enemy of the conflicting groups, who must come together to prevail. Eventually, the solidarity crumbles and group begin to again turn against each other. Another stopgap solution to conflict is simply avoiding it. Although this does not resolve the problem, it can help get a group through a period of time in which those who are involved may become more objective, or a greater, more immediate goal would have been met. Along those lines, another solution is smoothing the groups for focus by focusing on common interest and de-emphasizing the differences between them. This approach is especially effective on relatively simple conflicts and is viewed as a short-term remedy. Yet another quick fix is to authoritative command. Also, what is an authoritative command? Authoritative command is where groups who cannot satisfactorily resolve their conflict are commanded by management. This response does not usually deal with the underlying cause of the conflict, which is likely to surface again in some way. This would probably be a choice of last resort in this era, or individual independence and self-determination. Although it is not always possible to change a person's behavior, by focusing on the cause of the conflict and the attitude of those who are involved, it will lead to a more permanent resolution. It is also possible to change the structural variables involving the conflicting groups, such as changing jobs or rearranging reporting responsibilities. This approach is much more effective when the groups themselves participate in structural changes decisions without meaningful input. This resolution method resembles avoidance of forcing and is not likely to succeed, finally frustrating all involved. Any method of response to conflict, lost productivity, miscommunication, or unhealthy work environment can be constituted in a forms of ADR or alternative dispute resolution. Alternative dispute resolution should also be appropriate to the needs of those involved. It is crucial that the organization determines the needs of its stakeholders, the types of conflict that occur, and the conflict culture. Now, conflict is dealt with within the organization. Before initiating an ADR program, any program must allow for creativity, approachability, and flexibility if people are asked to utilize it. All employees all employees should be aware or involved in the establishment if is hit or miss. If it is work properly without full involvement or input, needs assessment is hit or miss. An assumption leads to attraction, which lead to the same place you were before. This suicide behavior by an organizational leadership would not be tolerated in marketing a new product or acquiring a capital asset. So why are people less important? Any collaborative process intended to address and manage intergroup conflict should be objectives to encourage it. In this major commitment of time and resources, success is its best reward. But to ensure an ADR approach suitable for you, it is important to 1. Build trust. So you have to trust each other. Next is clearly define participants, roles, and authorities. Third, establish ground rules. Fourth, promote leadership. Next, bring a collaborative attitude to the table. Next is maintain participant continuity. Next, recognize time and resource constraints. Address cultural and resource constraints. Address cultural differences and power imbalance. Build accountability and organizational commitment. Make this a consensus process. Produce early measurable results. Link decision making and implementation. Promote good communication and listening skills. And this will help you to lessen intergroup conflict in your area. Conflicts within conflict within or between groups can be destructive or constructive, depending on how the conflict is handled. When an organization is creating a dispute, when the organization is creating a dispute resolution process, there are there are key factors to success. 1. A critical mass or individuals who are committed to the process, a leadership group who perceive it in their best interest and the best interest of the people they have, or the people they serve. Strategic cooperation among historical enemies. Realistic and satisfactory outcomes. a moratorium on hostilities or conflict-seeking behavior. These are also barriers to success: fear of losing power, unwillingness to negotiate, no perceived benefit, corporate philosophy, top leader reluctance, lack of knowledge about ADR, and lack of success stories. So, responsible measures to reduce barriers and encourage a true paradigm shift are paradigm shift are training incentives, marketing, periodic review, case studies, and top management supports of participation. Facilitators trained in meditation and other forms of ADR are unnecessary resources from outside or within the organization. The workplace of the millennium will have in-house meditation or other conflict management programs to reduce formal claims and act as risk management business practice. So now let us proceed to the next topic. Walton's approach to third-party peacemaking interventions, more towards interpersonal conflict. Walton's approach to third-party peacemaking intervention has a lot in common with a group intervention but is directed more towards interpersonal conflict. Third-party interventions involve confrontation, and Walton outlines confrontation mechanisms. A major feature of this mechanism is the ability to diagnose a problem accurately. The diagnosis model is based on four elements, namely the conflict issues, precipitating circumstances, conflict-related acts, and the consequences of the conflict. It is, it is also important to know the source of the conflict. Source could be substantive issues. Source could be substantive issues. Substantive issues. Source could be substantive issues, which is conflict related to practices, scarce resources, and differing conception of roles and responsibilities. Source of conflicts could also be emotional issues, involve feelings between the parties, such as anger, hurt, fear, resentment, etc. The former require bargaining and problem solving. The latter require restructuring perceptions or working through negative feelings. Ingredients of productive confrontation include the following: mutual positive motivation, which refers to the willingness on both parties resolve the conflict, balance of power without any power differentiate between the parties involved in a confrontation. Synchronization of confrontation effort with the two parties address the conflict simultaneously, and differentiation and integration of different phases of the intervention must be well paced. The intervention involves working through negative feelings and relevant positive feeling. The intervention must allow sufficient time for the process to take place. Conditions that promote openness should be created. This could be done through setting appropriate norms and creating a structure that encourages openness. Reliable communicative signal refers to using language that is understood by the parties involved in the confrontation. Optimum tension in the situation means that the stress experienced by both parties ought to be sufficient to motivate them but not too excessive. General principles on negotiation involve approaches to people, interests, options, and criteria. People have different feelings and perceptions, therefore, it is important to separate people from feelings. Interest. Looking at party interests provide a vehicle for resolving conflict rather sticking to inflexible position that entrench the conflict. Options ought to be generated in order to come up with best option for resolving conflict. Criteria for evaluating the success of the intervention ought to be clear and objective. So now let us proceed to large group interventions. Large group interventions. A large group intervention can be used to present discuss, validate, and or develop the learning history. It can also be a powerful method to come to a new actions in real time. I think the combination of the step of the learning history, C stages, and one more events based on principles of large group interventions bring more satisfying results in creates opportunities to come to new conversations, new actions, strategic choice. This is based on the principle invite a wide variety of people. If possible, everyone who is part of the system focus on creating the system in focus and to create a setting that crosses the family of large group interventions comprise a wide variety of methods, some of them with detailed prescriptions from the design, like the future search, some very open, like open space and everything in between. Large group intervention methods can be a value of process, learning history process are open space, the world cave, real-time strategic change. Those in particular they have flexibility in format, the process and goals of the learning history, relatively short preparation time, possibility to restrict duration to half a day, no obligation to have one or more time-consuming conference or 3 days more, stimulating conversations, reflections, and actions.